Alright guys, stop it with the Freljord memes, okay? Because I'm going to show you a Freljord deck that I think is in a pretty damn good spot in the meta right now. So show it some respect. I'm just kidding. Okay, hey guys, it's Brother, and welcome back to another episode of LoR Explained. If you're new to the show, LoR Explained is just me breaking down Legend of Runeterra decks that I think are pretty cool. As always, the deck list and code will be provided in the description below, so feel free to check it out for yourself after the video. And with that out of the way, today I'll be breaking down a pretty spicy deck that I found on Mobalytics called Ashe Sejuani. Man, we need a better way of naming decks in this game. Okay, restart. Hey guys, today I'll be breaking down a pretty spicy deck I found on Mobalytics that I'm going to call Ashical. So let's first talk about the champions in our deck, Ashe and Sejuani. And a lot of people, when they hear the words Ashe and Sejuani together, they're gonna be like, that doesn't work, dude. Sejuani doesn't mix well with Ashe at all. She's better off combined with another faction, with another champion, like Misfortune, because she's not, okay, jeez. We get it. Sejuani's super good now because Vi got nerfed, I get it. But none of that matters here because, dudes, believe it or not, our deck doesn't actually revolve around Sejuani. In our deck, we don't have any way of dealing direct damage to our opponent's Nexus except for combat, so we can't really abuse Sejuani's leveled up effect anyways. But at the same time, leveling her up isn't going to be a priority because in this deck, her role is just to be a big beater. We're pretty much just using her as a 6 mana 5/6 overwhelm unit that gives an enemy unit frostbite and vulnerable for the round. Instead, Ashical revolves around Ashe. And the goal of our deck is to play out our curve, make favorable trades through frostbite effects, and close out the game through our big beaters. Alright, I mentioned her a lot now, so let's just get into our biggest baddie, Ashe. So Ashe is a 4 mana 5/4 champion that frostbites the strongest enemy unit when she attacks, and levels up once you frostbite 5 or more units. Ashe is a pretty sweet card. She's able to fulfill her own level up requirements, and also forces our opponent to make unfavorable trades. But that's not even the sickest part about her kit. The sickest part is that once Ashe actually levels up, she becomes our strongest finisher by creating a spell on the top of our deck called Crystal Arrow. Against several decks in the format, Crystal Arrow is going to pretty much frostbite their entire board. And since Ashe's leveled up ability, well, her form says enemies with 0 attack can't block, all of a sudden our opponent's Nexus becomes pretty damn juicy. So ideally, we want to try and set up for a lethal attack with Ashe. And by the time we reach turn 8 or 9, we should have enough dudes on the board that playing a Crystal Arrow and attacking with our dudes should just win us the game, hopefully. Just remember that Crystal Arrow goes on the top of the deck when we level Ashe up and not into our hand, so we gotta take that into account before we make a big brain lethal play. So now I hope that you have a pretty good idea of what we're trying to do in this deck, because if not, go rewind the video right now and watch part 1 again so that you know what's happening and I get an extra view. Just kidding, I don't actually know if I get an extra view or not. Okay, let's move on to part 2 and talk about the units in our deck. And I think the easiest way to understand our units is to work our way up the curve, starting off with Omen Hawk. So Omen Hawk is one of the best 1 mana units in Runeterra right now, and it gives us something to do on turn 1. This cutie just buffs up our feature units, which is going to be helpful for making favorable trades during the mid game. Also, keep in mind that there's a lot of removal spells in the format right now that deal exactly 3 damage. So Omen Hawk potentially increasing Ashe's health from 3 to 4 is pretty relevant and can help her stick on the board a little better. Iceville Archer is just a great dude and helps us control the board through Frostbite and gives us a 3/1 body to work with. He does get picked off by spells like Vile Feast and Static Shock, but if left alone, he can get in some good chip damage during the early game and stay back to block fearsome units. Alright, next up we have a pretty spicy and important card called Trifarian Glory Seeker. So Trifarian Glory Seeker is a 2 mana 5/1 with Challenger, and the downside to this card is that it can't block and only has 1 health. So just like Iceville Archer, Glory Seeker can be picked off by the same 1 damage spells, but that's a worst case scenario. And the best case scenario is if it's left alone, this card can usually guarantee at least a 1-for-1 trade, and it's especially good at picking off our opponent's champions, especially Ezreal. I don't like Ezreal. Okay, plus, you have to take into account that our deck has cards like Omen Hawk to potentially beef it up to 2 health, and Frostbite effects to help it trade into more creatures. So playing offensively with Ashical feels really good, and you'll actually find that Glory Seeker is a big part of the reason why. And finally, we have Aberson Sentry, which is just a 2/1 body that replaces itself, and is it a boring card? A little bit, but it's a good card to fill out our curve. Next up in our 3 and 4 drop slots, we have Averson Trapper, Babelbjerg, and Treferian Assessor. Now, Averson Trapper is a 3 mana 3/3 that puts an Enraged Yeti near the top of our deck. And after playing the deck a few times, I ended up realizing that a lot of decks right now actually struggle to deal with the Yeti. But, you know, if you really think about it, it kind of makes sense. A 5/5 body sticks on the board really well right now, and there's not many removal spells in the format or in the metagame right now that can get rid of it. Like maybe Thermogenic Beam and Vengeance, but that's really fine, because if your opponent is going to pay 7 mana to Vengeance a 1 mana Yeti, I think I'd call that a win, dude. In addition, since the Yeti only costs 1 mana, I was usually able to play another threat on top of it in the same turn, which was pretty nuts. And finally, the Yeti having 5 damage is actually a really relevant number in this deck because of our next card actually, Treferian Assessor. So Treferian Assessor draws us a card for each 5+ power unit we have on the board, and is going to be our main draw engine in the deck. Due to the large amount of 5 power units in our deck, like Ashe, Treferian Guardseeker, and like Yetis, we're going to be able to consistently hit at least 1 to 2 cards with Treferian Assessor. Plus, as a bonus, Treferian Assessor also counts itself as one of the units, so it can draw as an extra card if it gets buffed by like an Omen Hawk or an Averson Hearthguard. And speaking of Averson Hearthguard, the last 2 units in our deck is Babelbjerg and Averson Hearthguard. Babelbjerg just helps us draw a unit with 5+ power when it's summoned, and really anything we get from it is going to be useful. But since Ashe has 5+ power, I like to think of Bjerg as a card that helps us out with the consistency of drawing Ashe. And our last unit, Averson Hearthguard, he's just a big dude that gives all units in our deck a +1/+1 stat bonus. I guess if you really think about it, Hearthguard is kind of like the Gyarados, and Omen Hawk is kind of like the Magikarp, you know? No? Alright, bad joke. Overall, we have a really good curve of creatures that can trade well into the enemy board, but we also want to be interacting with our opponent as well, so let's quickly go over the spells in our deck that help us out with that. Brittle Steel and Elixir of Iron are pretty self-explanatory. They're just really great at keeping our units alive, and since they're both at burst speed, they don't give our opponent a lot of room to react. Calling Strike has actually been pretty sick. Calling Strike kills a unit that has 3 or less power, and that's really relevant in the current metagame, since it kills a lot of popular champions right now, like Heimerdinger, Swain, Ezreal, Thresh, Misfortune. Like, it's been really impressive, and I think it's been an awesome addition to the deck. Last but not least, in our deck we have 2 6-mana spells, the first of which is Harsh Winds, and Harsh Winds is a simple card that's in here for a simple reason. Frostbiting 2 enemies at burst speed makes combat super hard for our opponent, and the card is just good at quickly leveling up our Ashe. And finally, the last card in Ashcool is Reckoning. And Reckoning says, if we have a unit with 5 or more power on the board, we kill all other units with 4 or less power. So, as you already know, our deck mainly consists of cards that have 5 power, so meeting the requirements of this card is going to be a breeze. Reckoning kind of acts like an extra win condition in the deck, and it's really good against decks that depend on having a lot of bodies on the board, like Bannermen and Spiders. And in our deck, we also have a lot of Frostbite cards to put our opponent's units at 0 attack, so against decks like Deep, we want to Frostbite their units first and then cast Reckoning, because then we can actually kill their bigger units. So to sum it up, this deck is all about making smart trades and building up our board until we can set up for a lethal attack with Ashe and Crystal Arrow. Even if we don't draw Ashe in time, the units in this deck do a really good job at just pummeling down our opponent, so if we get our opponent low enough, we can just try to draw into our Sejuani instead and have her finish off those last few points of damage through Overwhelm. Anyways, if you were like an Ice and Lightning mage in MapleStory, or if you're just looking for like a really competitive Ashe deck, I really think this deck is for you. But if you didn't reach those 2 requirements, then you might have just wasted 8 minutes of your life listening to me. So I'm sorry. Okay, but anyways, I've been thinking about posting some gameplay footage, so if that's something that interests you guys, just let me know. But otherwise, that's about it for today's episode of LoR Explained. If y'all like the video, please make sure to leave a like. It lets me know that you're enjoying the content. And of course, if you want to see more Legends of Runeterra Explained, click on that subscribe button and tap that bell icon to get alerts every time I post a video. Till next time, peace.